Today, history is made with Judge Neil Gorsuch sworn in as a Supreme Court justice.
The U.S. Senate voted to confirm Gorsuch to the Supreme Court on Friday by a 54-45 margin. Gorsuch's elevation to the country's highest court comes almost 14 months after the death of Justice Antonin Scalia.
Here with more, legal analyst Vikas Bajaj. Vic, good morning. Good to see you on this Monday.
Likewise. Happy Monday to you.
Okay, a lot of controversy that we've been hearing about Judge Gorsuch over the past few weeks is he's coming into a very divided Supreme Court. How soon are we going to see his impact?
Well, let's say today he will actually be sworn in both by the Senate and by Justice Kennedy, who was really his mentor at a certain time when he was clerking for the Supreme Court of the United States. The impact would be immediate, and that is because at the middle to the end of this month, the Supreme Court actually gets together with all the justices and the Supreme Court staff, and they make a decision on which cases they actually want to hear for the coming term. Now, this is crucial, and that is because there are thousands upon thousands of petitions for the Supreme Court to actually review cases and decisions from around the country. So when the Supreme Court makes a decision as to which issues they actually want to see come forward to the Supreme Court and have a decision that will apply to all the states in the Union, that's a dramatic effect. And so to answer your question, it would be an immediate effect, in my opinion.
We're going to get to the issues. Raul's going to talk about some of those in just a moment. But I'm just curious, I was reading an article about him being the new guy. What does that mean, being the new guy? Does he get weight? Is there like a seniority thing amongst them?
Oh, most definitely. And you see, of course, you have the supervising justices who have been there for quite a bit of time, and their decisions have more weight, although equal in number, but you have majorities created and opinions created and force from the opinions created by senior judges. So you would actually see some of the more not senior judges moving underneath decisions made by, for instance, Kennedy, or in this case, Gorsuch, supporting decisions that may be more on the conservative side. So there's a bit of following that will occur, of course, initially, but you have to understand these are 9 people that are extremely qualified. So to determine seniority amongst 9 individuals who have been put in positions that they have been is a bit of a difficult task.
I mean, we've all started new jobs, and you talk about having to hit the ground running. Let's talk about the issues. Gay rights, the president's second travel ban executive order, California's restriction on carrying a concealed gun. How do they prioritize, and how do they decide which cases they will look into?
Well, that's a great question. And again, Raul, that's an excellent question, because there are so many conflicts that need to be resolved with judicial opinions throughout the nation. So the 3 that you mentioned are really hot topics right now, not only because they have been litigated and appealed and litigated and appealed, but because these are issues that are leaving states in a bit of a quandary. In other words, some states want to have certain types of laws which would constrict or allow, for instance, everyone who is not, for instance, a felony conviction suffering individual to protect themselves with guns. But states have different laws. And the national government, the federal government, has one law. So that would, for instance, be a law and a decision that you would see the Supreme Court gravitating towards, just to provide some sort of tranquility in the execution of the law as dictated by the Supreme Court.
Speaking of the law, if you look at his record, do you think there are going to be cases that may come up where he might not necessarily rule as what the conservatives expect him to?
Well, that's very hard to say. I don't have a crystal ball, nor do I believe anybody should in this particular situation predict. I will say, however, that Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch has been very clear during confirmation hearings, as well as through interviews that he's had on his way to the nomination, indicating very clearly that he will not be swayed by, for instance, the president who appointed him and nominated him. And that is important because you have a Supreme Court justice who is exercising an enormous amount of autonomy and independent thinking. So if we take him at his word, we can expect that he will conduct his analysis of the Constitution with an originalist platform. What did the original framers mean, and what was the original intent?
But do you think that that just wasn't what he was expected to say to get the nomination, or is that really what he meant?
Well, that's also something that's hard to say without getting into his head, but of course it is a political confirmation. But if you look at his history, he has been consistent as an originalist, meaning going back to what the framers' intent was and what the original intent was by the framers when they drafted the Constitution. It's hard to argue he has been inconsistent in any way, despite the attempts during the confirmation hearings to make it so.
One swearing in down. We have another one at 8 o'clock. We'll be carrying that live for you and dip into that. Vikas Bajaj, we thank you for your expertise as always.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, the time right now.